All right, but we're going to be talking about the golden rule today. And I called this putting the gold in the golden rule. And I'm going to read the two examples where it talks about this in the New Testament. And then we're going to talk about where the gold comes from in this. It's going to seem a little odd at first maybe, but as we track through it, it'll hopefully make more sense. Matthew 7 in verse 12 is the first verse we're going to read. Matthew 7:12. In everything, therefore, treat people the same way you want them to treat you, for this is the law and the prophets. Now, when most people talk about the golden rule, they'll say, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That's the common way, but there's different ways to say it. The next case he mentions it is over in Luke. Luke chapter 6, verse 31. Luke 6:31. He says, treat others the same way you want them to treat you. Now I'm reading from the New American Standard Bible. Your translations will be worded a little bit differently, but it's the same idea. The golden rule is, if you want to be treated a certain way, you need to make sure that you treat other people that same way. And so it's, when I asked my kids this morning kind of about it, like if they could tell me what the golden rule was, my youngest went right into quoting Leviticus 19, the second greatest commandment. Love your neighbor as yourself. And even though that's not typically how people word the golden rule, that's exactly the golden rule. It's kind of the same idea. Because if you love people, if you love your neighbor the way you love yourself, by default, you're going to treat them the way you want them to treat you. So it's just another way of saying the same thing. But this is one of those things where I talk a lot about how the world has a sense of morality about it. And morality is just kind of like how we define right and wrong. And if we define ourselves by morality, a lot of times that's a subjective sliding scale. And so as the people of Yahweh, whatever morality we have, we need to also couple it with holiness. We're going to give some examples of where this comes into play. I'm going to read some examples from different religious writings of different Buddhism in different places. They all have the golden rule. Just about every world religion has the golden rule. Even Satanists have the golden rule in their own way. And nobody would look at them and say, oh, well, that's holiness. But yet they all have the same thing. So here's just a few examples. In Judaism, in the Talmud, specifically Shabbat 31a, it says, that which is hateful to you to do to another, that is the entire Torah, and the rest is its interpretation. Go study. Sounds pretty much like what we just read. Islam says, none of you truly believes until he loves for his brother what he loves for himself. Same idea. So the Muslims have it. And the Baha'i faith, this is what they say. Lay not on any soul a load which you would not raise to be laid upon you, and desire not for any one of the things you would not desire for yourselves. Same basic idea. In Hinduism, they have, one should never do that to another which one regards as injurious to one's own self. This, in brief, is the rule of Dharma. So far, these world religions are all expressing the golden rule, but we'll keep going. Buddhism. Hurt not others in ways that you yourself would find hurtful. And Jainism, this is kind of an obscure religion, but in happiness and suffering, in joy and grief, we should regard all creatures as we regard our own self, and should therefore refrain from inflicting upon others such injury as would appear undesirable to us if inflicted upon ourselves. That's basically just a fancily worded version of what we just read. And Confucius, if you ask Confucius what he says, he would say, well, the question is there a single saying that one may put into practice all one's life? And Confucius says, that would be reciprocity. That which you do not desire, do not do to others. A couple more. In Taoism, they say, regard your neighbor's gain as your own gain, and your neighbor's loss as your own loss. And I mentioned Satanists a second ago, even the Wiccans. Now, for this to be understood, Wiccans, generally speaking, fall into two camps. There's pantheistic and there's animistic. So either way, pantheistic basically believe that whatever they define as divinity is in everything. It's in the rocks, it's in all the creatures. Animism doesn't necessarily believe in deity per se, like what we would call a god, but they believe that everything is conscious. Either way, what they say is they have what they call the rule of three. And before I read this, I did confirm this is not some magic spell because it is Wicca. You got to be careful. They say, ever mind the rule of three. 3 times your acts return to you. And so it's this whole idea of whatever you do to others will come back to you 3 times. So like if you do something good to your neighbor, it will come back to you 3 times as good. If you do something bad to your neighbor, it will come back to you 3 times as bad. So all of these faiths, all of these religions have the golden rule. And so the question is, what makes it unique to our walk? Why is this in our Bibles? Because I'm a big believer that all Scripture is breathed by Elohim. It's all available for edification, for reproof, for training in righteousness, all those things that Paul says. Why is this basic tenet of world morality spelled out in our Scriptures? And so I think I have an answer for why, and it goes beyond just basic humanity. So we're going to set this up and read some text from the Old Testament. We're going to go to Genesis chapter 6. We sang a song about this earlier. Genesis chapter 6. And we're going to read verses 11 through 18. And as I read through these first several scriptures, the connection might not be obvious, but I think at some point I'm going to look around the room and I'm going to see some light bulbs going off. So it's going to be exciting when that happens. It came about when man began to multiply on the face of the land and daughters were born to them, that the sons of Elohim saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves whomever they chose. Then Yahweh said, my spirit shall not strive with man forever, because he also is flesh. Nevertheless, his days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of Elohim came in to the daughters of men, and they bore them children. These were the mighty men of old, men of renown. Yahweh saw the wickedness of man was great on the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Yahweh was sorry that he had made man on the earth, and he was grieved in his heart. And I just want to pause right there. If I just think of myself like personally, if there was ever a point where Yahweh was sorry that he created me, how terrible is that for me? Like how bad do you have to be that your maker actually is sorry that he created you? But yet humanity as a whole was so corrupt that he was sorry, he regretted making them. And it's just something to think about when we kind of look at our walks. We don't want to become odious like that to him. Verse 7, Yahweh said, I will blot out man from whom I've created from the face of the land, from man to animals, to creeping things, and to birds of the sky, for I am sorry that I have made them. But Noah found favor in the eyes of Yahweh. These are the records of the generations of Noah. Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his time. Noah walked with Elohim. Noah became the father of 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now the earth was corrupt in the sight of Yahweh, and the earth was filled with violence. Elohim looked on the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way upon the earth. Then Elohim said to Noah, the end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. And behold, I am about to destroy them with the earth. Make for yourself an ark of gopher wood. Then you shall make the ark with rooms, and shall cover it inside and out with pitch. This is how you shall make it. The length of the ark 300 cubits, its breadth 50 cubits, and its height 30 cubits. You shall make a window for the ark, and finish it to a cubit from the top, and set the door of the ark in the side of it. You shall make it with lower, second, and third decks. Behold, I, even I, am bringing the flood of water upon the earth to destroy all flesh, in which is the breath of life from under heaven. Everything that is on the earth shall perish. But I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall enter the ark, you and your sons and your wife and your sons' wives with you. So life is crazy right now in Noah's time. And we know that the Messiah prophesied that in the last days it would be like the days of Noah or like the days of Lot. But the thing that I wanted to highlight here is that there was a very specific interaction between Yahweh and Noah. Yahweh came to Noah and asked him to do something very specific. Okay? So just keep that in mind as we go through this. We're going to see a theme established. Let's go over to Genesis 22. Genesis 22. This is when Isaac is offered. We're going to read verses 1 through 19. It came about after these things that Elohim tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham. And he said, Here I am. He said, "Take now your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains which I will tell you." So Abraham rose early in the morning and saddled his donkey, and took 2 of his young men with him, and Isaac his son, and he split wood for the burnt offering, and arose and went to the place of which Elohim had told him. On the 3rd day, Abraham raised his eyes and saw the place from a distance. Abraham said to his young men, "Stay here with the donkey, and I and the boy will go over there, and we will worship and return to you." Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac his son, and he took in his hand the fire and the knife. So the 2 of them walked on together. Isaac spoke to Abraham his father and said, "My father." And he said, "Here I am, my son." And he said, "Behold the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" Abraham said, "Elohim will provide for himself the lamb for the burnt offering, my son." So the 2 of them walked on together. Then they came to the place of which Elohim had told him, and Abraham built the altar there and arranged the wood and bound up his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Abraham stretched out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of Yahweh called to him from heaven and said, "Abraham, Abraham." And he said, "Here I am." He said, "Do not stretch out your hand against the boy and do nothing to him. For now I know that you fear Elohim, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me." Then Abraham raised his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him a ram caught in the thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up for a burnt offering in the place of his son. Abraham called the name of that place, "Yahweh will provide," as it is said to this day, "In the mount of Yahweh it will be provided." Then the angel of Yahweh called to Abraham a second time from heaven and said, "By myself I have sworn, declares Yahweh, because you have done this thing, and have not withheld your son, your only son. Indeed, I will greatly bless you, and I will greatly multiply your seed as the stars of the heavens, and as the sand which is on the seashore. And your seed shall possess the gate of their enemies. And your seed, all the nations of the earth shall be blessed." Why? Because you have obeyed my voice. So again, Abraham was asked to do something very specific in his interaction with Yahweh here. Let's turn a few pages over to Genesis 31. Now this is Jacob. He has left Laban, his father-in-law. He's taken his family, he's taken all of his possessions, and he's hightailing it out of town. Genesis 31, we're going to read verses 11 through 13. Then the angel of Elohim said to me, this is Jacob, in the dream, "Jacob." And I said, "Here I am." He's relaying to Laban what's happened. He said, "Lift up now your eyes and see that all the male goats which are mating are striped, speckled, and mottled, for I have seen all that Laban has been doing for you." Of course, remember the thing here where Laban kept trying to cheat Jacob out of livestock. And so Jacob had this scheme developed where he was going to kind of, I don't really fully understand the genetics or anything of how this worked, but he was basically making blemished livestock that he could take for himself. And so Yahweh blessed him in that. Verse 13, "I am the Elohim of Bethel, where you anointed a pillar, where you made a vow to me. Now arise, leave this land, and return to the land of your birth." So you might have noticed a phrase, and I'm trying not to lean too heavily into this because Tim is going to do a teaching at some point in the future. So I'm leaving plenty on the table for him to get into. But this phrase, "Here I am," it's going to come into play as we read. But we heard this back with Genesis, with Abraham and Isaac. We've heard it with Jacob here. And it's this idea of Yahweh is calling to someone, and that person responds with this statement, "Here I am." Let's go over to Genesis 46. Genesis 46. And let's read verses 1 through 7. So Jacob has moved to Israel at this point. "So Israel set out with all that he had and came to Beersheba and offered sacrifices to the Elohim of his father Isaac. Elohim spoke to Israel in visions of the night and said, 'Jacob, Jacob.' And he said, 'Here I am.' He said, 'I am Elohim, the Elohim of your father, and do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for I will make you a great nation there. I will go down with you to Egypt, and I will also surely bring you up again, and Joseph will close your eyes.' Then Jacob arose from Beersheba, and the sons of Israel carried their father Jacob and their little ones and their wives in the wagons which Pharaoh had sent to carry him. They took their livestock and their property which they had acquired in the land of Canaan and came to Egypt, Jacob and all his descendants with him, his sons and his grandsons with him, his daughters and his granddaughters, and all his descendants he brought with him to Egypt. So we have this theme that we're going to keep seeing where Yahweh engages with somebody. He calls to them. He gives them a specific task. He asks them to do something very specific, and they do it. Let's go over to Exodus 3. We're going to see a little bit more of this. Exodus 3. I'm going to read the whole chapter this time. Exodus 3. Moses was pasturing the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the west side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of Elohim. The angel of Yahweh appeared to him in a blazing fire from the midst of a bush. And he looked, and behold, the bush was burning with fire, yet the bush was not consumed. So Moses said, I must turn aside now and see this marvelous sight, why the bush is not burned up. When Yahweh saw that he turned aside to look, Elohim called to him from the midst of the bush and said, Moses, Moses. And he said, you guessed it, here I am. Then he said, do not come near here. Remove your sandals from your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. He said also, I am the Elohim of your father, the Elohim of Abraham, the Elohim of Isaac, and the Elohim of Jacob. Then Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at Elohim. Yahweh said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and have given heed to their cry because of their taskmasters, for I am aware of their sufferings. So I have come down to deliver them from the power of the Egyptians, and to bring them up from the land to a good and spacious land, to a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanite, and the Hittite, and the Amorite, and the Perizzite, and the Hivite, and the Jebusite. Now behold, the cry of the sons of Israel has come to me. Furthermore, I have seen the oppression with which the Egyptians are oppressing them. Verse 10. Therefore come now, and I will send you to Pharaoh, so that you may bring my people, the sons of Israel, out of Egypt. But Moses said to Elohim, who am I, that I should go to Pharaoh, and that I should bring the sons of Israel out of Egypt? And he said, certainly I will be with you. And this shall be the sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall worship Elohim at this mountain. Then Moses said to Elohim, behold, I am going to the sons of Israel, and I will say to them, the Elohim of your fathers has sent me to you. Now they may say to me, what is his name? What shall I say to them? Elohim said to Moses, I am who I am. And when you look at the meaning of this, it basically, in the Septuagint, it just says the being. So basically, this is existence. Yahweh's very name entitles just raw existence, being. So you've got this idea that there's in some religions and some cultures, like we mentioned Buddhism, they have this whole idea of nothingness. Their goal is to get back to absolute nothing. Well, Yahweh is the opposite of that. Yahweh is not nothing. Yahweh is every something there could possibly be. He is existence in its totality. He is literally everything. So his name is much more than just a couple syllables there. Thus he said, you shall say to the sons of Israel, I am has sent me to you. Verse 15. Elohim furthermore said to Moses, Thus you shall say to the sons of Israel, Yahweh, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has sent me to you. This is my name forever, and this is my memorial name to all generations. Go and gather the elders of Israel together and say to them, Yahweh, the Elohim of your fathers, the Elohim of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, has appeared to me, saying, I am indeed concerned about you and what has been done to you in Egypt. So I said, I will bring you up out of the affliction of Egypt into the land of the Canaanite, and the Hittite, and the Amorite, and the Perizzite, and the Hivite, and the Jebusite, to a land flowing with milk and honey. They will pay heed to what you say, and you with the elders of Israel will come to the king of Egypt, and you will say to him, Yahweh, the Elohim of the Hebrews, has met with us. So now please let us go a 3 days' journey into the wilderness, that we may sacrifice to Yahweh our Elohim. But I know that the king of Egypt will not permit you to go except under compulsion. So I will stretch out my hand and strike Egypt with all my miracles which I shall do in the midst of it, and after that he will let you go. Now, we're always asking for miracles, aren't we? If you're an Egyptian, you don't necessarily want to see Yahweh's miracles. These are not the kind of miracles that we see in the Catholic Church, here and there, and these healings and all this. These are more like judgments. I will grant this people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, and it shall be, when you go, you will not go empty-handed. That every woman shall ask of her neighbor and the woman who lives in her house articles of silver and articles of gold, and clothing, and you will put them on your sons and your daughters. Thus you will plunder the Egyptians. So again, we have a specific instance of Yahweh calling to somebody, that person answering, and that person being asked to do something very specific. We're going to have one more case of this in the Old Testament here. We're going to go to 1 Samuel chapter 3. And we're going to read about the whole thing here, the whole chapter. 1 Samuel chapter 3. Now the boy Samuel was ministering to Yahweh before Eli. So Eli was the high priest at this time. And just for some background, this is when they had the tabernacle set up at Shiloh. This is before David took the ark to Jerusalem. This is before the temple was built by Solomon. So Eli was the high priest at the time. And word from Yahweh was rare in those days. Visions were infrequent. Sounds a lot like now. Now you can go on YouTube and TikTok and all these places, and you can find lots of visions and lots of prophecy and lots of, the Lord spoke to me this morning and Jesus woke me up in my bedroom and said, go tell the people, da, da, da. We can find a lot of that. But in my opinion, the genuine word of Yahweh, genuine visions from Yahweh are infrequent, just like they were then. Your mileage may vary on that, but that's just what I've seen with my experience. Verse 2, it happened at that time as Eli was lying down in his place. Now his eyesight had begun to grow dim, and he could not see well, so he's older at this point. The lamp of Elohim had not gone out yet, and Samuel was lying down in the temple of Yahweh where the ark of Elohim was. Can you imagine having that as your sleeping place in the tabernacle? Now, if I read this literally, I could say he was in the Holy of Holies because that's where the ark was. But that doesn't make any sense to just let a little boy sleep in the Holy of Holies when the high priest was only able to go in there once a year. So he was somewhere in the area, but either way, he was in the tabernacle, it seems. Yahweh called Samuel, and he said, here I am. Verse 5, then he ran to Eli and said, here I am, for you called me. But he said, I did not call you. Lie down again. So he went and lay down. Yahweh called yet again, Samuel. So Samuel arose and went to Eli and said, here I am, for you called me. But he answered, I did not call you, my son. Lie down. Now Samuel did not yet know Yahweh, nor had the word of Yahweh been revealed to him. This is really interesting. So he's a Nazarite. He was given as a Nazarite from birth. He hasn't had a haircut at all. He's not allowed to drink any wine. Of course, he's a little kid at this point, so he's probably not drinking wine anyway. But anyway, so his life has been wholly devoted to Yahweh. And we know the whole story with Hannah. His mom, she couldn't conceive. And so Yahweh was gracious and opened her womb. And she basically dedicated Samuel to him. And in spite of that, at this age, he hasn't really known Yahweh. Verse 8, so Yahweh called Samuel again for the third time, and he arose and went to Eli and said, here I am, for you called me. Then Eli discerned that Yahweh was calling the boy. And Eli said to Samuel, go lie down, and it shall be, if he calls you, that you shall say, speak, Yahweh, for your servant is listening. So Samuel went and lay down in his place. Then Yahweh came and stood and called as at other times, Samuel, Samuel. And Samuel said, speak, for your servant is listening. Yahweh said to Samuel, behold, I am about to do a thing in Israel at which both ears of everyone who hears it will tingle. And that day I will carry out against Eli all that I have spoken concerning his house from beginning to end. For I have told him that I am about to judge his house forever for the iniquity which he knew, because his sons brought a curse on themselves, and he did not rebuke them. Therefore I have sworn to the house of Eli that the iniquity of Eli's house shall not be atoned for by sacrifice or offering forever. So as a father with children, if I was told that the iniquity, the sins of my children could not be atoned for forever, that's crushing. But as far as accountability goes, this all goes back to Eli, because he knew exactly what his sons were doing. And he, like I said, he didn't rebuke them. They were doing all kinds of shady business there at the tabernacle, stuff that I won't mention here to keep it PG. But Eli was in a position to correct them, to rebuke them, to put them in their place, or to even take them out of the priesthood. But instead, he let them continue. So there is no covering for that. So Samuel lay down until morning. Then he opened the doors of the house of Yahweh. But Samuel was afraid to tell the vision to Eli. When Eli called Samuel and said, "Samuel, my son," and he said, "Here I am," he said, "What is the word that he spoke to you? Please do not hide it from me. May Elohim do so to you, and more also, if you hide anything from me of all the words that he spoke to you." So Samuel told him everything and hid nothing from him. And he said, "It is Yahweh. Let him do what seems good to him." Thus Samuel grew, and Yahweh was with him, and let none of his words fail. All Israel from Dan, even to Beersheba, knew that Samuel was confirmed as a prophet of Yahweh. And Yahweh appeared again at Shiloh, because Yahweh revealed himself to Samuel at Shiloh by the word of Yahweh. So Samuel's a kid. It doesn't say how old he was, but after this little incident with Eli, he's a confirmed prophet, and everybody knows it. Like, I think about my children. If one of my children had a reputation for being a confirmed prophet of Yahweh, like, it would boggle the mind. Like, my head would explode. Not literally, but when you just think of the gravity of that, how amazing would that be, you know? But yet here he is. And so we have this same kind of idea here with Samuel. Yahweh called. Yahweh actually reached out to him and engaged him. And Samuel said those words, "Here am I. Here I am." Now, when we started off with Noah, we don't have that verbatim. Yahweh didn't say Noah, Noah, and Noah didn't say, "Here I am." But the same general idea that Yahweh is coming to people, he's initiating contact, and he's asking them to do something very specific. And in each of these cases, if we were to read the whole narrative, we would see that each of these men did exactly what Yahweh asked them to do, the way he asked it, and as a result of that, they were all blessed. So keep all that in mind. We're going to go back to Matthew 7. And I want to give a disclaimer here, because normally when I do a study like this, I like to kind of start off with how I got to that point and kind of what my thought process was, what triggered or inspired me. I kind of held that back until now for a reason. We're going to go back to Matthew 7. And this will be a relatively short teaching, by the way, but I think it's one that's important, and I think that it's an easy point to make, but it's one that is huge to understand. And so I think it's worth taking the time to make this point, and hopefully by understanding this, our strength will all be our faith will all be strengthened, and we'll just have a better walk. So Matthew 7, we read verse 12 earlier, but we're going to back up. We're going to back up to verse 7, and we'll see why here in a minute. This is Matthew 7:7. "Ask, and it will be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and it will be opened to you. For everyone who asks receives, and he who seeks finds, and to him who knocks it will be opened. Or what man is there among you who, when his son asks for a loaf, will give him a stone? Or if he asks for a fish, he will not give him a snake, will he? If you then, being evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father who is in heaven give what is good to those who ask him? And everything, therefore, treat people the same way you want them to treat you, for this is the law and the prophets." Now, my inspiration on this, Shauna and I have been reading through the Gospels lately. And we got to this point, and I read it, and I noticed this word, therefore. You know, like we see therefore a lot in Paul's writings. Therefore, da-da-da-da-da-da. And when he says therefore, it's like saying, because of what I just said, and then he goes on. So when he says, in everything therefore, it prompted me to go back and say, well, what did he just say? Because he's referencing back to something he said earlier in this whole golden rule. And the immediate context is this idea of praying. It's this idea of not being afraid to ask him for things, knocking at the door, asking him for good things. And, you know, it's this whole idea of going to the Father in prayer. We already know he knows what we need, but he still wants that relationship where we ask him anyway. And so we read this, and then we see this is the golden rule. Like, treat people the same way you want them to treat you, for this is the law and the prophets. And this is connected to the idea of asking Yahweh, knocking on the door, and he will open. So that led me to do some digging, well, treating others the way I want to be treated, what does that have to do with asking Yahweh for things? What does that have to do with reaching out to Yahweh and asking him for blessings or asking him for help or any of these things, knocking on the door and him opening? What does that have to do with loving my neighbor as myself. What does it have to do with this moral concept of just being good to people because you want them to be good to you? And this is why I call this putting the gold in the golden rule, because like we read earlier, all of these world religions, even atheists who have no religion, or at least they'll say they have no religion, they have a religion of themselves, but even they have this basic sense of morality for the most part. We humans by nature are generally kind. We have our moments. Some of us stumble, and you do have legitimate jerks out there, people who are just wired to be mean. But your average person is kind. Your average person is compassionate, generally speaking, even out there in the world. I tell this story sometimes. I mentioned Wiccans earlier. I worked with a practicing Wiccan in one of my old jobs. And nicest lady, helpful, friendly. She was one of my better co-workers. We got along really well. And here I am, this man who's trying to follow Yahweh and is endeavoring to be holy to the God of Abraham. And I'm dealing with this, for all intents and purposes, a witch. They don't call themselves witches because of the baggage associated with that term, but basically they are. And she was one of the most helpful people there. We got along great. She was fundamentally a good person. Obviously off on her theology, but fundamentally a good person. She was someone who was practicing what we call the golden rule. But as we read through this, it's like, okay, well, if this is such a well-known value amongst humanity, why did the Messiah take the time to verbalize it twice in Matthew and Luke? And then why is he connecting it to this idea of prayer? And then I get to thinking, okay, because as Israelites, we're supposed to have the horizontal connection with each other, love your neighbor as yourself, and we're supposed to have the vertical connection with Yahweh, love Yahweh your Elohim with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. These are the two great commands on which the whole law and prophets hang. And so I got to thinking like, okay, he's connecting these together because he wants us to apply the golden rule to our relationship with the Father, not just each other. In other words, however we want Yahweh to treat us, we need to make sure that we're treating him the same way. And this is why I read these scriptures earlier where Yahweh was going to someone like Samuel or Noah or Abraham and asking them to do these very specific things for him. Imagine if these people had said no. Imagine if Abraham had said, no, I'm not going to do this. This is my son. I can't do this. As a father, he would have been within his rights to do that. Just strictly speaking on a human level. Noah, like, really, you want me to go through all this, like, 100 years or however long it was, and all this effort to build this huge edifice, and having no guarantee that it would even rain? Like, these are drastic things that Yahweh asked these people to do, and they all to a man did it. So in other words, when Yahweh came knocking on their door, they opened. When Yahweh asked them for something, they said, okay, and they gave it to him. And so the golden rule, when we put the gold in it, what makes the golden rule different from us is that we incorporate Yahweh into it. The world leaves him out. We bring him into it. And we know that ultimately, and I'm going to just say it, we'll get to it later, but I'll just go ahead and spill the beans. There's going to come a point when Yahweh himself, the Almighty, is going to live with his people. That's always been his desire, is to live with his people. And if he lives with us, that makes him our neighbor. Like, isn't it crazy to think of Yahweh as our neighbor? But he counted Abraham as a friend. That's a close relation that we think of as a human. He calls us these other things like his bride, his sons, his daughters, all of these other human relationships that we can get our brains around. Why not a neighbor? So let's back up a little bit. We're going to read a couple examples of this. I mentioned earlier this idea of Yahweh asking and us answering versus us asking and him answering. Let's go to Isaiah 52. We're going to read a couple chapters in Isaiah here, and then we're going to close it out in Revelation. Isaiah comes before Jeremiah. Isaiah 52. We're going to read the whole chapter. Awake, awake, clothe yourself in your strength, O Zion. Clothe yourself in your beautiful garments. O Jerusalem, the holy city, for the uncircumcised and the unclean will no longer come into you. Shake yourself from the dust, rise up, O captive Jerusalem. Loose yourself from the chains around your neck, O captive daughter of Zion. For thus says Yahweh, you were sold for nothing, and you will be redeemed without money. For thus says Yahweh Elohim, my people went down at the first into Egypt to reside there. Then the Assyrian oppressed them without cause. Now therefore, what do I have here, declares Yahweh, seeing that my people have been taken away without cause? Again, Yahweh declares, those who rule over them howl, and my name is continually blasphemed all day long. Therefore, because of what he just said, my people shall know my name. Therefore, in that day, I am the one who is speaking, here I am. Here I am. We read those instances of Yahweh calling to somebody and that person saying, here I am. Here we have an instance of Yahweh's people calling out to him, and his response is, here I am. How lovely on the mountains are the feet of him who brings good news, or the gospel, who announces peace and brings good news of happiness, who announces salvation and says to Zion, your God reigns. Listen, your watchmen lift up their voices. They shout joyfully together, for they will see with their own eyes when Yahweh restores Zion. Break forth, shout joyfully together, you waste places of Jerusalem, for Yahweh has comforted his people. He has redeemed Jerusalem. Yahweh has bared his holy arm in the sight of all the nations, that all the ends of the earth may see the salvation of our Elohim. Depart, depart, go out from there, touch nothing unclean. Go out of the midst of her, purify yourselves. You who carry the vessels of Yahweh, but you will not go out in haste, nor will you go out as fugitives, for Yahweh will go before you, and the God of Israel will be your rear guard. Behold, my servant will prosper, he will be high and lifted up and greatly exalted, just as many were astonished at you, my people. So his appearance was marred more than any man, and his form more than the sons of men. Thus he will sprinkle many nations, kings will shut their mouths on account of him. For what had not been told to them they will see, and what they had not heard they will understand. And I would love to just keep reading. This is in those servant chapters of Isaiah. We could go all the way back into the 40s and read all the way up to 66. But we don't have time today. But I wanted to emphasize this chapter because this is a case, we see this phrase all through the scriptures, you will be my people, I will be your Elohim. It's this relationship. And it's my position that that's the fundamental covenant. Everything beyond that is just terms of the covenant. What does that relationship look like? How do we practice it? It's like when a man and a woman agree to get married, that's the covenant. Once you have that agreement, now we start to look at what does that look like. Then we have our wedding vows and we have living arrangements and all this kind of stuff. But the actual agreement that these two people want to be together, they want to be one, that comes first and initiates the covenant. And so we have this kind of call and response thing here. So we'll go to Isaiah 58, a few pages over. And I'm going to read the whole chapter. Cry loudly, do not hold back. Raise your voice like a trumpet and declare to my people their transgression, and to the house of Jacob their sins. And of course, by that he means go on social media and tell everybody that they're wrong about everything that they believe, and you're right, and you've got the correct calendar, and you've got the correct, pronunciation, and all this stuff. Something tells me that's not what he means, but that's what we do. And I've been guilty of that myself. Like, we're not going to throw stones in a glass house here. I've done this. Thankfully, I've learned from my behavior, hopefully. Yet they seek me day by day and delight to know my ways, as a nation that has done righteousness and has not forsaken the ordinance of their Elohim. They ask me for just decisions. They delight in the nearness of Elohim. Why have we fasted and you do not see? Why have we humbled ourselves and you do not notice? This is the people asking. Behold, on the day of your fast you find your desire and drive hard all your workers. Behold, you fast for contention and strife and to strike with a wicked fist. You do not fast like you do today to make your voice heard on high. Is it a fast like this which I choose, a day for a man to humble himself? Is it for bowing one's head like a reed and for spreading out sackcloth and ashes as a bed? Will you call this a fast, even an acceptable day to Yahweh? Is this not the fast which I chose, to loosen the bonds of wickedness, to undo the bands of the yoke, and to let the oppressed go free and break every yoke? Is it not to divide your bread with the hungry and bring the homeless poor into the house? When you see the naked, to cover him, and to not hide yourself from your own flesh. Then your light will break out like the dawn, and your recovery will speedily spring forth, and your righteousness will go forth before you. The glory of Yahweh will be your rear guard. We just read that earlier. Then you will call, and I, Yahweh, will answer. You will cry, and he will say, Here I am. If you remove the yoke from your midst, the pointing of the finger and speaking wickedness, and if you give yourself to the hungry and satisfy the desire of the afflicted, then your light will rise in darkness, and your gloom will become like midday. And Yahweh will continually guide you and satisfy your desire in scorched places and give strength to your bones. And you will be like a watered garden and like a spring of water whose waters do not fail. Those from among you will rebuild the ancient ruins. You will raise up the age-old foundations, and you will be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of the streets in which to dwell. If because of the Sabbath you turn your foot from doing your own pleasure on my holy day, and call the Sabbath a delight, the holy day of Yahweh honorable, and honor it, desisting from your own ways, from seeking your own pleasure, and speaking your own word, then you will take delight in Yahweh. And I will make you ride on the heights of the earth, and I will feed you with the heritage of Jacob your father, for the mouth of Yahweh has spoken. And so in this, we've got this kind of contrast. He's talking about how people are treating other people. These people are keeping these fasts. This might be Day of Atonement. They had several fasts at that time. It could have been any one of them. But they're keeping this fast, and it's like, oh, look at me. Look how pious and religious and spiritual I am. But on that same day, they're putting a yoke of burden on their fellow man. They're oppressing their neighbor. And so the point here is, golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. You guys are violating the golden rule by treating your neighbors this way. And you come to me and want relationship? No. So golden rule applies, like I said, I think horizontally and vertically. We can't claim to be obeying the golden rule vertically if we're not doing it horizontally. The world understands the idea of applying it human to human. But this isn't good enough. Yahweh expects more from his people. So we're going to close out with a couple chapters in Revelation. And like I said, I want to leave plenty of time for discussion. We're going to read the letters to the assemblies. We're going to read all 7 of them because they build to a point. We're going to read Revelation chapter 2 and 3. To the angel of the church of Ephesus write, the one who holds the 7 stars in his right hand, the one who walks among the 7 golden lamps. I have to pause just a moment here. These 7 stars, this is a little point of trivia. If you take the constellation Pleiades, you look up in the sky, you see this fuzzy little blur of stars up near Taurus, the constellation. There's multiple stars in that blur. There's 7 main ones that are typically visible to the naked eye. If you take a picture of those and you maintain the geometric relationship between those stars, and you overlay that on a map of Asia Minor where these 7 churches are, it's a match. And I've tested that over the years because it seems too good to be true. But if you get a good picture of the Pleiades, the 7 main stars, everything has to be to scale. If your map's not to scale, it won't work. Assuming that everything is to scale and it's 1-to-1 ratios, it overlays. Now, how amazing is that? And he's talking about these 7 assemblies, and he's referencing 7 stars, knowing that this relationship exists. Like, to me, that's proof that we're dealing with a much higher intelligence that we can even comprehend to make this happen. Okay, so let's just go back there. The one who holds the 7 stars in his right hand, the one who walks among the 7 golden lampstands says this, I know your deeds and your toil and perseverance, and that you cannot tolerate evil men, and you put to test those who call themselves apostles, and they are not, and you found them to also be false. And you have perseverance and have endured for my name's sake, and have not grown weary. But I have this against you, that you have left your first love. And of course, there's a whole room for interpretation on what that means. Therefore, remember from where you have fallen, and repent, and do the deeds you did at first. Wait, he actually expects us to do something? He doesn't just expect blind knowledge or belief or some kind of intellectual thing. Like, he actually wants us to act. Imagine that. Do the deeds you did at first, or else I'm coming to you, and I will remove your lampstand out of its place unless you repent. Yet this you do have, that you hate the deeds of the Nicolaitans, which I also hate. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the assemblies. To him who overcomes, I will grant to eat of the tree of life, which is in the paradise of Elohim. And of course, Nicolaitans, there's different interpretations. The one that I've seen over the years that makes the most sense, this is the whole hierarchy thing, where you've got like one guy at the top, and he's like this dictator, and everybody in the assembly has to go to him. And we see this in a lot of the churches today, where you've got this really heavy-handed pastor or heavy-handed bishop or whatever, his way or the highway, the buck stops there, that kind of thing. And Yahweh doesn't want that. Messiah talked about that's how the Gentiles do. The Gentiles lord over themselves. They do this whole thing. We're not going to do this in his kingdom. So that's what the Nicolaitans were about. Verse 8. To the angel of the church of Smyrna write, the first and the last, who was dead and has come to life, says this, I know your tribulation and your poverty, but you're rich, and the blasphemy by those who say they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. Do not fear what you are about to suffer. Behold, the devil is about to cast some of you into prison so that you will be tested, and you will have tribulation for 10 days. Be faithful until death, and I will give you the crown of life. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the assemblies. He who overcomes will not be hurt by the second death. So we've sort of got this pattern here. It's not explicit, but he's asking these assemblies to do something, and if they do that, which he calls overcoming, then he will do something in response. This idea of him knocking on the door, them answering. Okay? Verse 12, and the angel of the church in Pergamum write, the one who has the sharp two-edged sword says this, I know where you dwell, where Satan's throne is, and you hold fast my name, and did not deny my faith, even in the days of Antipas, my witness, my faithful one, who was killed among you, where Satan dwells. But I have a few things against you, because you have there some who hold the teaching of Balaam, who kept teaching Balak to put a stumbling block before the sons of Israel, to eat things sacrificed to idols, and to commit acts of immorality. So you also have some who in the same way hold the teaching of the Nicolaitans. Therefore repent, or else I am coming to you quickly, and I will make war against them with the sword of my mouth. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the assemblies. To him who overcomes, to him I will give some of the hidden manna, and I will give him a white stone and a new name written on the stone, which no one knows but he who receives it. Can you imagine having that level of relationship? It would be like having a child, and you give that child a pet name, and only the two of you know that name. Brother and sisters don't know it. Mom doesn't know it. Like nobody else knows. You just have this little special thing just between the two of you. That's a level of intimacy between a parent and a child that is really difficult to express, but that's kind of one way to do it. Verse 18, to the angel of the church in Thyatira write, the Son of Yahweh, who has eyes like a flame of fire and his feet are like burnished bronze, says this, I know your deeds, and your love and faith and service and perseverance, and that your deeds of late are greater than at first. So Ephesus was having trouble enduring. Ephesus was growing weary. Thyatira is actually growing stronger. Their deeds are actually becoming more amazing. They're actually growing in their faith. But I have this against you, that you tolerate the woman Jezebel, who calls herself a prophetess, and she teaches and leads my bondservants astray so that they commit acts of immorality and eat things sacrificed to idols. I gave her time to repent, and she does not want to repent of her immorality. Behold, I will throw her on a bed of sickness, and those who commit adultery with her into great tribulation, unless they repent of her deeds. And I will kill her children with pestilence, and all the churches will know that I am he who searches the minds and hearts, and I will give to each one of you according to your deeds. But I say to you, the rest who are in Thyatira, who do not hold this teaching, who have not known the deep things of Satan, as they call them, I place no other burden on you. Nevertheless, what you have, hold fast until I come. He who overcomes, and he who keeps my deeds until the end, to him I will give authority over the nations, and he shall rule them with a rod of iron, as the vessels of the potter are broken to pieces, as I also have received authority from my Father, and I will give him the morning star. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the assemblies. Chapter 3. To the angel of the church of Sardis write, he who has the 7 spirits of Yahweh and the 7 stars says this, I know your deeds, that you have a name, that you're alive, but you are dead. Wake up and strengthen the things that remain, which are about to die. For I have not found your deeds completed in the sight of my Elohim. So remember what you have received and heard, and keep it, and repent. Therefore, if you do not wake up, I will come like a thief, and you will not know what hour I will come to you. But you have a few people in Sardis who have not soiled their garments, and they will walk with me in white, for they are worthy. He who overcomes will thus be clothed in white garments, and I will not erase his name from the book of life, and I will confess his name before my Father and before his angels. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the assemblies. And to the angel of the church of Philadelphia, write, He who is holy, who is true, he who has the key of David, who opens and no one will shut, and who shuts and no one who opens, says this, I know your deeds. Behold, I have put before you an open door which no one can shut, because you have a little power, and have kept my word, and have not denied my name. Behold, I will cause those of the synagogue of Satan, who say that they are Jews and are not, but lie, I will make them come and bow down at your feet, and make them know that I have loved you. Because you have kept the word of my perseverance, I also will keep you from the hour of testing, that hour which is about to come upon the whole world, to test those who dwell on the earth. I am coming quickly. Hold fast that you have, so that no one will take your crown. He who overcomes, I will make him a pillar in the temple of my Elohim, and he will not go out from it any more. And I will write on him the name of my Elohim, and the name of the city of my Elohim, the New Jerusalem, which comes down out of heaven from my Elohim, and also my new name. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. And finally, to the angel of the church of Laodicea write, the Amen, the faithful and true witness, the beginning of the creation of Elohim, says this, I know your deeds, that you are neither cold nor hot. I wish that you were cold or hot. So, because you are lukewarm and neither hot or cold, I will spit you out of my mouth. Because you say, I am rich and have become wealthy, and I have need of nothing. And you do not know that you are wretched and miserable and poor and blind and naked. I advise you to buy from me gold refined by fire, so that you may become rich, and white garments so that you may clothe yourself, and that the shame of your nakedness will not be revealed, and eye salve to anoint your eyes so that you may see. Those whom I love, I reprove and discipline. Therefore, because of that, be zealous and repent. Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come into him, and I will dine with him, and he with me. He who overcomes, I will grant to him to sit down with me on my throne, as I also overcame and sat down with my Father on his throne. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the assemblies. So hopefully by this point, the point is made. Every door has two sides. You could knock from the inside, you could knock from the outside. And I think of all the places he could have put the golden rule, this basic tenet of human morality that everybody kind of gets, of all the places he could say that, anywhere in the scriptures, he could have put that like the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount. He could have done it later in his ministry. There were numerous occasions, but he chose the moment where he just talked about praying to his Father, asking and knocking and the door will be open. He chose that whole context to say, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Treat others the way you want to be treated. And then he says, that's the law and the prophets. So it's this whole idea. The law and the prophets is about relationship. It's about covenantal relationship with Elohim. And so with any relationship, if it's lopsided and one person is doing all the giving and the other person's doing all the taking, that's not really a relationship. If one person is doing all the asking and the other person's not asking for anything, that's not really a relationship. So even with vending machines, people talk about, God's not a vending machine. Well, the point of a vending machine is you get what you want out of it. You want some Doritos, maybe you want a soda or whatever. But even with a vending machine, you still have to put something into it. But all too often in our walks these days, and especially as this whole idea of greasy grace or hyper grace or whatever you want to call it takes hold, this whole idea that we don't have to do anything at all except for just believe. All we have to do is just know that he exists, know that he died for us, etc., etc. Nothing else is on us. But I think that if we apply the golden rule, we would say that's not fair, because that's a completely one-sided relationship. That's believing That's believing in the government. Uncle Sam. Uncle Sam will take care of me. Uncle Sam will pay my bills and give me free Wi-Fi and all this kind of stuff. And then I'm not paying any taxes. This actually happens, by the way, in politics in this day of age. But you have people who are literally contributing nothing and are getting things in return. And it's not right, it's not fair. The golden rule applies to all the nations. Everyone knows it. But where we put the gold into the golden rule is when we bring Yahweh into the golden rule. We bring that vertical expression of the golden rule into it. And we know that the whole law and prophets hangs on those two. Love Yahweh your Elohim with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. And so to me, if we're going to actually fulfill the golden rule as outlined by our Messiah, we have to be willing to knock when he answers. And several of us here have had those occasions where we've known for a fact that the Father is reaching out to us in some way. Maybe it's coming through the word of somebody else. Maybe it's a direct supernatural thing. Maybe somebody has heard his voice. There's different manifestations of it. But we do have people who have actually interacted and been asked or told to do something. That's Yahweh knocking on our door. And if we're going to expect him to knock on the door, to answer the door when we knock, we need to be willing to answer the door when he knocks. So it sounds like an obvious point. It is an obvious point, but I think it's a very important point. And I just wanted to kind of put this out there just kind of as an encouragement and kind of a reminder, And as a community, as tribe, as a faith family, the more we practice the golden rule horizontally, the more we're doing it vertically, because the very nature of our horizontal relationship is centered around Yahweh. So if we foster that and we grow it, we're growing both relationships simultaneously. And if we grow our vertical relationship with Yahweh by applying the golden rule vertically, then that's trickling down to our horizontal relationships as well. It's a symbiotic kind of thing. One feeds into the other. And this world tries to separate the two. That's why we have all these people out there in the world that believe in the golden rule, yet look at the world around us. The world around us does not look like people follow the golden rule, because generally they don't, even though everybody believes we should. So I'm going to close out at that. Like I said, relatively short teaching, relatively simple idea, but I felt like when we first read this in Matthew, it hit me upside the head like a ton of bricks. Like it really just dropped on me. And so I decided, well, we'll just teach on that. Maybe somebody needs to hear it. I know I needed to hear it. So at this point, I will go ahead and open the floor for any questions, comments, strong opinions.